Chapter 206. 3. Don't say anything. Kiss me. She had been cold and detached just a moment ago, and had suddenly turned to become so warm and gentle. Lu Junyao arched up an eyebrow in surprise, not knowing what kind of a scheme the young lady was hatching in her mind. He then saw a smile slowly bloom like a flower upon those lips. The person who could not wait to get away from him was at that moment actually leaning in close to him. Her phoenix-like eyes seductive and her voice titillating. Her beautiful face strumming the chords in his heart with that smile. Every movement she made so enticing. Truly a demoness born to seduce people. Her lips parted slightly and she asked slowly in a captivating voice. Have you fallen for me? The expression on Lu Junyao's face became hesitant, never expecting that she would ask that, which caught him completely off guard. He narrowed his eyes and did not answer her directly, but merely laughed softly as he pulled the distance between the two of them even closer, their foreheads almost going to touch. What do you think? The mysterious vortex swirling within those violet orbs could almost suck a person's soul right into them. In the end, Qingyu was unable to stand up against the devil, who had lived for more than 200 years. As he spoke, his thin lips seemed like they were almost going to kiss her, as he slowly leaned in closer and closer. It seems he was making it a habit of taking liberties with her. Qingyu drew in a deep breath, and pushed back against the man's chest with one hand, putting some distance between themselves. Her head turning away to one side, as she tried to calm down the emotions surging up inside from the man's sudden kiss. Lu Junyao rested his chin on the palm of one hand as he tilted his head to stare fixedly at her. A happy smile hanging from his lips. Had he been too rough just now and had given the little one too big a fright? Things like this must be taken slowly, or it would be disastrous if he came cause her to dislike him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The sky was turning dark, and it was almost time to go to the fleeting cloud fortress. Shi Zhanchen went to look for that prodigious young lady from the faint mist sect. Hearing the report from a subordinate, Ji Yanlong laughed, feeling rather amused. He was never prone to showing such feelings, never interested in worldly affairs. Except when he's out on a mission, he would always remain in that bamboo house, and would not take a single step outside. So what could be the reason for him to take such actions this time? I heard that the young lady possesses a flawless countenance, a true rare beauty, and also a prodigious all-element wielder, so she is naturally extraordinary. Maybe it is because she is so different from others that made him pay her so much attention. The subordinate behind him then ventured a guess on his own. Ji Yanlong's face smiled meaningfully, and he then shook his head lightly. Shi Zhanchen is a very strange man. From the day that I brought him back here, he had then decided on his own to establish the Assassin's Temple. I had only indulged him, because what he did was beneficial to the Carefree Valley, as it would expand the Carefree Valley's might. Despite the fact that he holds such great powers, he had never cared for vain titles and fame, always keeping a very low profile within the Carefree Valley, never seeming like he was plotting anything. I have never been able to fathom just what is it that he really seeks. Chapter 206. 4. Don't say anything, kiss me. What is Shi Zhanchen thinking? Not mentioning whether he is scheming something by getting close to the young lady for the moment. What your subordinate does not understand is something else. The subordinate contemplated for a moment before he suddenly opened his mouth to say. Shi Zhanchen had never failed any mission he went on, regardless whether it was to assassinate someone or to retrieve an item. But with the sacred Buddha palm lotus this time, he actually slipped up. Doesn't the valley chief think that something feels strange? Ji Yanlong raised an eyebrow to look at the man. What are your thoughts about that? Your subordinate thinks that it's impossible that he failed. Something must have happened during the mission. That is indeed unusual. Ji Yanlong nodded as he rubbed his chin, a deeply thoughtful look coming to show on that amiable and harmless-looking face. It looks like something interesting must have happened on his last trip out. Night descended, and the people from the 3 great sects participating in this year's friendship meet had all gathered together. Besides the participating disciples, people who wanted to spectate were also allowed to follow them up. But the fleeing cloud fortress was not a place that was easy to go up to. One would need to climb over 10,000 steps, and no spirit powers could be employed, or they would be sent flying out by the barrier array at the fleeting cloud fortress. At that height, it was really no joke. If one was already halfway up and was struck down, haha. Not to mention they would have wasted all that effort, and be out from the competition. Whether their corpse could still be found in one piece was another question. Hence, even though the fleeting cloud fortress was one of the most wondrous sights in the constellation lands, no one had ever been able to easily climb their way up there, as it was not only a great test of one's physical endurance, one needed to also possess extraordinary determination. If one was not able to persevere all the way right to the top, but wanted to give up halfway, there was no chance for such regrets, with death the only other option. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. With the fleeting cloud fortress, there was actually a beautiful legend surrounding it. It was told that the place tested how true of heart the love between two people really was, as only for people who were truly in love would they be able to reach the top to the fleeting cloud fortress for their loved one. To make a wish within the fleeting cloud fortress, that would definitely come true. For a man and a woman, the hidden hands of fate would be guiding them along, the two of them destined to end up together. Don't know whether the legend of the fleeting cloud fortress is truly real, but reaching the top is the first thing that everyone needs to do now, and all of you must definitely persevere till you reach up there, or you would come to lose your life if you give up halfway. So all of you must choose carefully. Ji Yanlong repeated as he beamed at everyone, his gaze sweeping over them. Everyone will also be welcome to verify whether the legend regarding two people in love is fact or fiction. As with such a great number of people here, maybe your destined one is among them. So on this climb up to the fleeting cloud fortress, men and women would move separately, each group entering from a different side, while we quietly await for your good word. Chapter 207. 1. Come here. Let me tell you a secret. Besides just taking one step after another to scale your way up to the fleeting cloud fortress, there is another secret passage that would take you all the way up to the top. But this secret passage was known only to one person, Ji Yanlong alone. He was just a regular man with no cultivated powers, and he could naturally not be able to compare with all the others who hold deep powers of cultivation. Hence, he was the only person who used the secret passage to go up there, while all the others, including the Carefree Valley's internal members, had to reach the fleeting cloud fortress based on their own strength, with no exception of favoritism. As men and women moved out separately, Qingbei was naturally unable to follow Qingyu. He could not help but look worriedly at her. His lips moved slightly, like he wanted to say something, but someone then hooked an arm around his shoulders from behind and pulled him along together. He turned his head to look, and saw the man's violet eyes sparkling with an extraordinary light under the night. Exceptionally beautiful to see. I'll be watching over this kid here. You just remember to be careful with everything you do. Lu Junyao curved up his lips as he gazed tenderly at the young lady. If you come to encounter any kind of danger that you are not able to resolve, you have the communication device I gave you, don't you? Remember to call out to me. The expression on Qingyu's face changed slightly, but she did not say anything and just nodded her head slightly. Although this fella usually acted a little odd, and was even often thuggish at times, he had never held back when it came to helping her. In regards to that point, Qingyu was really rather grateful to him. Just when she was about to go in through the entrance, the man suddenly called out to her. Qingyu turned herself around slightly and looked at him in bewilderment. Lu Junyao laughed, the sound becoming exceptionally magnetic and melodious under the night. He then asked her in a soft voice about the fleeting cloud fortress legend. Do you believe it? Qingyu blinked her eyes, rather surprised that he would show interest in that, but she still replied truthfully. With things like that, it's true if one believes in it and false if one doesn't, isn't it? The smile at the corners of the man's lips deepened. I feel that it's rather interesting though. After we reach the top, I have something to tell you. What is it that you cannot tell me now? Qingyu raised an eyebrow and asked. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. I can't now. The man's face showed a mysterious smile, and he ignored the young lady after that, grabbing at Qingbei to go into the entrance on the other side. Qingyu could not help but feel a little frustrated. What does that fellow want to tell her? That thought was still lingering in her mind when a gust of wind blew past her. She turned around and saw a slim, seductive-looking figure passing beside her, white robes billowing, carrying an air of noble aloofness that made people not dare to get too close. Yen Ning Luo. Qing Yu arched up an eyebrow, but did not notice anything strange. Mu Lai and Ming Yi came walking over from the side right after that, each of them holding one side of her, and Qing Yu did not pay any more attention to it. Chapter 207. 2. Come here. Let me tell you a secret at the fleeting cloud fortress. Only when one was standing at the highest point would they be able to see the unbelievable view below. At that moment, Ji Yanlong and the 4 demon ghosts who were never far from his side had reached the top through the secret passage. He gazed down from that high point and said with a soft laugh, "Wonder how many people will fall off from the fleeting cloud fortress this time and have their bodies smashed to smithereens." From ancient times, people who are able to climb their way up here with their own strength have been few and far between. One of the 4 demon ghosts responded in a raspy voice. It wouldn't mean much for them, even if those people managed to make their way up here, as only one as capable as the Valley Chief with unsurpassing intelligence can be the fleeting cloud fortress final host. A deep and meaningful smile then curled up at the ends of Ji Yanlong's lips as he murmured softly, "That's right. The fleeting cloud fortress is not a place that anyone can come up to so easily. But since they have chosen to deliver themselves to their deaths, what can I do?" The people who were coming up were not just the disciples participating in the friendship meet competition, but it included many respected and highly revered personnel who held high positions in the other 2 great sections. Moreover, even the ones holding the highest authority in the Faint Mist sect and the Limitless sect would be coming to spectate at the matches. Haha. He had all the time in the world to wait for them to come up here. But just how many of them would be able to make their way up here alive was not known yet. He had already been very merciful to have given them a warning. Everything at the fleeting cloud fortress was clearly presented to everyone before their eyes that night. The path under their feet was rather uneven and bumpy. They were not surrounded in pitch-black darkness, but the place was speckled with soft glowing fairy lights like stars all around, some green, some blue, a breathtaking sight that lent a sense of enchantment under the beautiful night sky. "What is that? It's really pretty." Qian Yun, who had been by Ming Yi's side, was drawn by the sight and could not help but open her mouth to comment. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU girls just love to look at beautiful-looking things, and when they see it, they just cannot help but to reach a hand out to touch them. Qian Yun knew very well that beautiful things were usually dangerous, but she still went ahead to stretch her hand out like she was bewitched. The expression on her face was highly wary as she reached out, but before she could even touch the glowing light, a palm suddenly smacked her hand away. Qian Yun felt as if she had just woken up from a dream, staring in bewilderment at the reddened back of her hand. She then turned her head to look at the young girl beside her. What did you hit me for? If I did not smack you back to your senses, you would already be dead." Ming Yi creased up her brows and continued to say, "Look carefully again to see what those things are. And you really dared to stretch your hand out to go touch them." Hearing that, Qian Yun then summoned up a ball of pale green flames in her palm. This was soul fire that people of the Soul Cultivators tribe were born with, linked with the fact that they possessed such powerful soul powers. Chapter 207. 3. Come here. Let me tell you a secret. After that young lady's strange and sudden death, it made the bunch of girls quit being so careless and indifferent, but to become alert and wary, fearful for their lives. On the stretch of their journey that came after that, besides being able to still see the countless number of blood-sucking glowing bugs, they did not encounter anything else that was all that strange. But that temporary spell of tranquility did not cause Qingyu to let down her guard in the slightest, for they had merely covered less than 10% of the tens of thousands steps of stairs, and who knew what kind of other dangers lay hidden behind them. On the other side, things were not so good for the men. Almost a good half of them were showing wounds and bruises on their bodies, dismayed faces covered in dust, looking highly wretched. But a certain someone stood out as the lone exception. Not only was his body clean and unspoiled as before, he looked every bit as suave as he did when they had just come in, without a single hair out of place, causing many people to be unable to help themselves but grit their teeth to see. Only the heavens knew what kind of an assault they had come under earlier. The ground beneath their feet suddenly started to shake, and countless rock golems suddenly broke out from underground, striking them before they could even react. There was limited space on those steps, and they were not able to execute much of their moves. Moreover, Ji Yanlong had already said that no spirit powers were to be used, or they would be thrown right off by the barrier array on top at the fleeting cloud fortress, their bodies impossible to find. So there was nothing they could do, but only to defend themselves, and it could well be imagined just how exasperating it was for them. There were ferocious beasts and human-shaped golems transformed out of rock, all of them extremely strong and powerful, and they were relentless with their pursuit, impossible to shake off like they had no weaknesses at all. Su Liamo, Shi Zhanchun and the others were able to handle things themselves easily, but the others were not so fortunate, where even Xian Yuanche, who was the 7th-ranked inner circle disciple, was a little disheveled and covered in a bit of dust. But there was still one single person who stood as the lone exception. Maybe other people had not noticed it, but Qing Bei was able to see it clearly. Lu Junyao, the deep and mysteriously unfathomable man, had not even moved a finger all the way from the very beginning. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. None of those golems even came close to the man. Maybe it was because of fear, but wherever he was as he made his way forward, all those monsters would clear a path for the man without needing any urging, surging around to attack the people behind him. Qing Bei was most fortunate. Not even a single hair on him was hurt, with the man protecting him the entire way. He looked at the bunch of men with swollen noses and bruised faces behind him, their clothes tattered and torn, and he could not help but felt his mouth twitch, suddenly feeling that he had latched himself onto the great thigh of a godly entity, his entire path completely clear of obstacles. Without needing to turn his head back to look, he was able to feel the eyes filled with such strong jealousy and envious hatred, they were almost boring holes into his back. Why are all these creatures not attacking you? After having hesitated for like half the day, Qing Bei finally could no longer hold back, but to ask the question that had been nagging him. Chapter 207. 3. Come here. Let me tell you a secret. The burning flames lit up the slightly sinister feeling air surrounding them, and closely at the glowing lights more closely, Qian Yun's face turned pale from fright, almost letting out a squeal. The sudden light from the flames seemed to alarm the glowing lights, as they let out an ear-piercing sharp screech. All those tiny little green and blue glowing lights, in what way were they just a natural pretty-looking phenomenon? It was a bunch of blood-sucking bugs whose wings were bigger than their bodies, and the light was emanating from their eyes. These creatures were highly timid, and as long as one did not go agitate them, they basically would not pose to be of any danger. But they were, however, a maniacal bunch, where if you were to even accidentally touch one of them, they would think that they were under attack, and would counterattack mercilessly. Thinking about it, with the fleeting cloud fortress so high up, 10,000 steps of stairs up, filled fully with so many of those terrifying blood-sucking bugs, just the thought of it will send chills up one's spine. Setting that the girl was really quite shocked, Ming Yi sighed, and stretched a hand out to pat the girl comfortingly on her back. That'll teach you not to be so careless again. How could you make such a mistake? You should know better than to go touch something so dangerous like that. Qian Yun's body was still in shock, frozen in place. Her face was pale as she stammered. I don't know why. I was just unconsciously reaching my hand out wanting to touch. You cannot blame it all on her. Qing Yu chirped in when she saw what was happening. Those bugs have some rather unusual eyes, and staring at them for too long would indeed mesmerize a person, causing them to do things that they are not aware of themselves. She had not even finished her words when a maniacal voice suddenly reached them, and many people were frantically trying to persuade her to stop. Ha ha ha. I'm the strongest in the world. I'm the most powerful. Look, I can fly. I'm flying, haha. Once she finished saying that, A petite little figure was seen suddenly leaping right off from the fleeting cloud fortress. Before anyone could even react, there was already no sign of her to be seen. Little Junior, read latest chapters at Wuxia World. A number of people beside the spot she was standing at hung their heads and cried. That entire scene had happened too fast, and there was no way any one of them was able to prevent that tragedy from happening. Although they had not been moving all that fast, but they had still come up a few hundred steps. That height, to a girl who had already lost her mind and was completely defenseless, meant only certain death from the plummet. How? Qian Yun's eyes were wide, her voice quivering quite a bit. Qing Yu shook her head with a regretful sigh, and then looked at the young girl and said, "Lucky for you, you had not looked at them for too long, and Yi was still able to smack you back to your senses. Otherwise, I fear that your body might already have been sucked dry of blood by now. Let's all be more careful from here on, and try to stick together. Do not stray too far away from the group, so that we'll be able to help each other in time in case of any danger." Mu Lai said with a grave face, her voice tinged with a chill. Chapter 207. 4. Come here, let me tell you a secret. After that young lady's strange and sudden death, it made the bunch of girls quit being so careless and indifferent, but to become alert and wary, fearful for their lives. On the stretch of their journey that came after that, besides being able to still see the countless number of blood-sucking glowing bugs, they did not encounter anything else that was all that strange. But that temporary spell of tranquility did not cause Qingyu to let down her guard in the slightest, for they had merely covered less than 10% of the tens of thousand steps of stairs, and who knew what kind of other dangers lay hidden behind them. On the other side, things were not so good for the men. Almost a good half of them were showing wounds and bruises on their bodies, dismayed faces covered in dust, looking highly wretched. But a certain someone stood out as the lone exception. Not only was his body clean and unspoiled as before, he looked every bit as suave as he did when they had just come in, without a single hair out of place, causing many people to be unable to help themselves, but grit their teeth to see. Only the heavens knew what kind of an assault they had come under earlier. The ground beneath their feet suddenly started to shake, and countless rock golems suddenly broke out from underground, striking them before they could even react. There was limited space on those steps, and they were not able to execute much of their moves. Moreover, Ji Yanlong had already said that no spirit powers were to be used, or they would be thrown right off by the barrier array on top at the fleeting cloud fortress, their bodies impossible to find. So there was nothing they could do, but only to defend themselves. And it could well be imagined just how exasperating it was for them. There were ferocious beasts and human-shaped golems transformed out of rock, all of them extremely strong and powerful, and they were relentless with their pursuit, impossible to shake off like they had no weaknesses at all. Su Liemo, Shi Zhanchen and the others were able to handle things themselves easily, but the others were not so fortunate, where even Xin Yuanche, who was the 7th-ranked inner circle disciple, was a little disheveled and covered in a bit of dust. But there was still one single person who stood as the lone exception. Maybe other people had not noticed it, but Qing Bei was able to see it clearly. Lu Junyao, the deep and mysteriously unfathomable man, had not even moved a finger all the way from the very beginning. None of those golems even came close to the man. Maybe it was because of fear, but wherever he was as he made his way forward, all those monsters would clear a path for the man without needing any urging, surging around to attack the people behind him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Qingbei was most fortunate. Not even a single hair on him was hurt, with the man protecting him the entire way. He looked at the bunch of men with swollen noses and bruised faces behind him, their clothes tattered and torn, and he could not help but felt his mouth twitch, suddenly feeling that he had latched himself onto the great thigh of a godly entity, his entire path completely clear of obstacles. Without needing to turn his head back to look, he was able to feel the eyes filled with such strong jealousy and envious hatred, they were almost boring holes into his back. Why are all these creatures not attacking you? After having hesitated for like half the day, Qing Bei finally could no longer hold back, but to ask the question that had been nagging him. Chapter 208. 1. Everyone stuck in a hopeless situation. The youth's exceptionally good-looking face was at least 60 to 70% alike to Qing Yu's, and he was at that moment gazing highly curiously at the man beside him. Even the youth himself had not come to notice that in those good-looking eyes of his, they were tinged with an almost imperceptible sparkle of worship. Lu Junyao curved up the corners of his lips and glanced at the youth to say, "Those golems have developed their spirit consciousness, so they would naturally not do something stupid like striking an egg against a rock. They know innately just how great the disparity in power really is, where even if all of them were to attack at the same time in a single surge, they will only end up being smashed up into dust." Qing Bei raised an eyebrow and looked at the man doubtfully as he asked, "Are these monsters really able to sense that you're someone not to be trifled with more than everyone else, and that is why they're keeping themselves far away from you? But besides being a little more good-looking than most men, this man does not look to be all that much different from others, doesn't he?" Hearing that, Lu Junyao merely smiled quietly at the youth as he stretched a hand out to ruffle the youth's hair. "Wait till the day you become truly powerful, and you'll then understand what I mean." Caught off guard and finding his head being ruffled up, Qing Bei jumped back a couple of steps in shock as he stared incredulously at the man and said, This habit of ruffling up people's head, did you pick that up from Qing Yu? It isn't enough that his head was always being rubbed like a little puppy by Qing Yu, and now he has met a man who likes to ruffle his head as well. And the man holds such unfathomable powers that there was no way he would be able to stand against him. So he had no choice but to quietly let his head be rubbed. Thinking of that, he felt that his life seemed so dark. Is his future one that he will forever be suppressed by these two people? Is he not allowed to have some dignity? The changes over the expressions on the youth's face were really fascinating to watch, altering so many times before turning into one of utter despair. Lu Junyao curved up his lips, feeling rather amused. "What? The lass likes to touch your head as well?" He had asked the lass why she would always throw such a fit whenever he touched her head. So it's because she was so used to touching the lad's head, and was just not used to it happening to her instead. Upon hearing the man say as well, the expression on Qing Bei's face was a little astounded as he asked, "Don't tell me that Qing Yu ruffled your head before." Lu Junyao scoffed upon hearing that. She wouldn't dare. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Bei then heaved a sigh of relief. He had though. "Keep close to me and stop daydreaming," the man called from in front, and Qing Bei quickly snapped back to his senses, taking a few quick steps to go catch up. Su Liemo had already been rather curious about this mysterious purple-robed man, and having just witnessed the man's terrifying powers intimidate the enemies right before his own eyes, deterring them from attacking the man at all, that was not something that just any skilled pugilist was able to do. He was not about to believe that this man was simply just a mere 7-star grade teacher, and he seemed to have appeared together with that last Qing Yu. The relationship between those two appeared to be rather close. Chapter 208. 2. Everyone stuck in a hopeless situation, but that lass was someone that the chief was fond of, and he would have to pay close attention to this man. On the other side, Ji Yanlong was seated inside the majestic palace at the highest point of the fleeting cloud fortress. There was a very big mirror inside the palace, and through that mirror, he was able to see everything happening below inside the fortress, everything within his grasp of control. Ji Yanlong was observing everyone through the mirror, when the mirror suddenly turned a pitch black. A black mist then rose up, and a voice filled with sinister mirth was heard. "Ji Yanlong, the master has ordered for you to activate all of the fleeting cloud fortress traps and arrays. Not a single person who has come here in the fleeting cloud fortress today can live, but just the young lady named Qing Yu." Hearing that voice, Ji Yanlong, who had been sitting proud and straight up in that kingly throne, was suddenly taken aback a moment, before he suddenly asked in confusion, "Why has the master given such an order? Isn't it said that he will not interfere with my affairs? Moreover, there are many noble and important people with highly prominent backgrounds here in the fleeting cloud fortress today. So if something unfortunate happens to them while participating in the Carefree Valley's friendship meet, how am I going to be able to answer for it to their people?" The voice was still filled with evil malice. These people have indeed not committed any wrong, but they can only blame it on the one single person who should not have set foot into this place is now here. The master's objective is just that one person, but nothing among all the ordinary and mundane things here in the fleeting cloud fortress can do anything to him. And only the trap the master has devised himself would be able to take down this person. Really? Ji Yanlong was a little surprised. Makes me wonder who could this person be. The face in the mirror clouded by black mist suddenly transformed, and the figure of a man appeared. Ji Yanlong found the figure to be unfamiliar, having no impression of having seen that person before. Has this person offended the master? You do not need to know that. This person is not from the constellation lands, but a highly skilled pugilist from a higher-leveled realm. He holds extraordinary power, and that is why ordinary methods would not be able to stop him. Remember to activate all the traps and arrays, and the master does not want this person to walk out from here the fortress alive. As for all the other people, you just do as you deem fit. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You hearing those words, Ji Yanlong's face turned pale from shock. My lord, the constellation lands is controlled by a set of laws. If I am to murder a person from a higher realm, I fear that I will suffer persecution. How could I possibly dare? With the master around, what do you have to fear? Very soon, the entire world will belong to the master. So how much could just killing one person from a higher realm matter? You're always being so timid and afraid of trouble. The sinister-sounding voice said with sarcastic contempt, his words filled with blind worship for his so-called master. Bolstered with that guarantee, Ji Yanlong's worry in his heart then dissipated a little. That face who always carried an easy light smile looked a little grave at that moment. Deliberating on it for a while, Ji Yanlong finally opened his mouth to say, in that case, then I shall follow the master's orders. But if I come to suffer any persecution from this, I shall expect the master to extend a helping hand. Chapter 208. 3. Everyone's stuck in a hopeless situation. That will naturally be the case. As long as you serve the master loyally, the master will not treat you shabbily. The voice was arrogant and disdainful, and then continued to add, remember to not harm that young lady Qingyu in any way. Upon saying that, the black mist in the mirror gradually dissipated and faded away, to show the view as it did before. At that moment, the fastest among the people had already ascended to reach over 1,000 steps up the fleeting cloud fortress. And among these people was Qingyu herself. Ji Yanlong's face was one of incredulity as he shook his head and murmured, just who is this? Qingyu? Even that stone-hearted and emotionless Shi Zhanchun had tried to get close to this young lady. And now the master was also treating her differently. How strange. Does any one of you feel like it's getting colder the higher we go? Ming Yi's lips were a little pale. Didn't know whether it was because she was afflicted with that frost poison for so many long years. She seemed to have become extra sensitive to any fall in temperature. Although she had been cured of the frost poison, and was not that afraid of the cold anymore, the sudden drop in temperature had still made her feel highly uncomfortable. I am feeling a little cold as well. Mu Lai nodded in agreement. Maybe not just merely a little cold. She lowered her eyes to look down at her hands, and she clenched up her long slender fingers. She actually saw a thin layer of frost break and fall in a glittering sprinkle. Winter had clearly passed, and the temperature should logically not fall so low. Moreover, the climate in the carefree valley was usually warmer than the wintry faint mist sect that would be blanketed in pristine white snow. Qingyu, who had been walking in front, suddenly halted her steps, and her eyes flashed with a sharp glint. Her cold, clear voice then sounded, show yourselves. Hearing that, Mu Lai and the others were taken aback. What is it? As Qingyu's voice fell, many white-colored things fell from the night sky, and soon, a layer of silver frost had formed under their feet. It had started to snow. Strange occurrences can only mean that there's devilry afoot. The few of them immediately tensed up their bodies as they surveyed the surroundings warily. Razor-sharp ice blades suddenly came shooting malevolently straight towards them, their tips tinged with a bright spot of blue. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Qingyu's eyes darkened. Look out! The tips of the ice blades are poisonous. The few of them quickly dodged away, and they saw the ice blades scratch the blood-sucking glowing bugs around them. In the very next instant, the light faded from those bugs, clearly already dead. After the few of them barely managed to dodge those icy blades, a sense of calm seemed to suddenly fall over the place, where no other strange signs were seen. The momentary peace passed very quickly, and they felt a tremor under their feet, like something huge was approaching from the front, its heavy feet stomping on the ground with every step, lumbering towards them. Chapter 208. 4. Everyone's stuck in a hopeless situation. What is that? Appearing from within the darkness before their eyes was a gigantic ape formed out of ice and snow. Its long fangs extended out till its neck, its red eyes staring malevolently at the group of people. Snow continued to fall relentlessly, not showing any signs of letting up at all, very quickly reaching ankle height. Such a scene seemed to be rather familiar. Qing Yu and Mu Lai looked at each other, and they saw understanding dawn in each other's eyes. Back when they had been in the demon beast's lair within the Arctic region up in the north many years ago, they had accidentally fallen into a cave, and they had encountered a similar scene just like this. But what they encountered there had been an ancient ice human, the ice and snow almost burying them. They managed to escape from there in the end, but they had only been about 10 years old at that time. Since time immemorial, water and ice do not mix, and ice is formed when water freezes, so it is afraid of fire. But this was not just regular ice, and of course any normal fire would not be able to do anything to it. A highly radiant smile suddenly curled up at the corners of Qing Yu's lips, as she looked at the young woman, with a cool expression on her face beside her. Do you remember that we took more than 2 hours last time to kill that ice person back then? I wonder how long we need this time. Mu Lai laughed scoffingly, her gaze disdainful as she stared at the ice ape that was fully intent on tearing them all to pieces. She then said coldly, I think an hour will be more than enough this time. Then my guess is half an hour. Qing Yu said with a smile. The next second, with perfect unspoken chemistry, the two of them slowly raised their hands, one with gold and red flames, the other with her palm crackling with a deep electrifying purple light, lunging lighting quick into the air, as the two spheres of elemental power crashed into each other, the power of the impact contorting the air surrounding the collision. The two spheres of elemental powers contended with each other for a while before they meshed together. The two of them then threw out a palm strike at the same moment, throwing the powerful sphere of joint elemental power straight towards the ferocious ice ape. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The ice ape roared loudly and opened its mouth wide to swallow the elemental power sphere down into its belly. It looked like it was not affected in the slightest, and it went on to launch a relentless assault on its two opponents. The expression on Qing Yu's face remained unchanged, her gaze fixed upon the ice ape lunging straight towards them, counting down silently in her heart. 1, 2, 3. Boom! An enormous explosion erupted, accompanied by a blinding intense fiery light, to blow up under the quiet night sky. It was such a large explosion that even the men who had entered from the other entrance from a different side were able to feel it. Chapter 209. 1. All who covet Qing has to die. What has happened here? It was such a huge blast. Which level did that explosion happen at? It was enormous. I wonder if the lassies were able to make it through that. I think that it's unavoidable that a good number of them were not able to live through that. The color of the flash of fire had not only been purely the fire element alone, but was tinged with purple and gold, a combination of at least 3 types of elements. Hence, the blast had been so explosive that they were still able to feel the aftereffects, even though quite a long while had passed. That must have been Qing Yu. Qing Bei felt that the powers behind that blast was rather familiar, and immediately knew that Qing Yu definitely had a hand in that enormous blast. His brows furrowed together. Could they have met with danger? Lu Junyao glanced at the youth and told him, Relax. She is able to protect herself well enough. With her level of cultivation and skills, very few things in this low-level realm can hurt her, unless it is something not from these lands. That's right. This low-level realm seemed to be showing more and more strange abnormalities, and the universal laws over the different realms looked to be of little use, as they were no longer able to hold down these strange powers, exceeding the realm's limits. Just like what happened not long before, when the devilishly powerful dark zombie had appeared in these constellation lands. It seemed like a mastermind was pulling the strings behind all these incidents. Ugh! Accompanying that almost inaudible grunt was the dull thud of a body falling to the ground following immediately after. Everyone turned to look in puzzlement towards the source of the sound, and came to see a disciple wearing the faint mist sect's uniform, standing with his head drooping down, his hand held up in the air, and his fingers curled up in the shape of a claw. The hand was all covered in blood that continued to drip down to the ground. Right by his feet lay a faint mist sect disciple. That person was lying on the ground with his face up, his eyes wide open, and had a gory hole in his chest that had blood flowing freely out of the wound. "Lingyu, have you lost your mind?" Another faint mist sect disciple shouted, as he looked at the first disciple in shock. "Why did you do that?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The man called Lingyu kept his head lowered, and did not respond at all. Seeing that, the infuriated disciple walked straight up to the guy and grabbed at his shirt collar and shouted, "Say something, would you? Have you gone mad? How can you kill one of your own fellow disciple? You, Erf." Before he could finish his sentence, his voice was replaced by a painfully pitiful scream. Everyone saw Lingyu, who had not moved at all for so long, suddenly grab the neck of the person before him, before he leaned forward, and bit right into it. And a gurgling sound was heard like he was sucking out the blood of his fellow disciple. The person was initially still cursing loudly in rage and surprise, but quickly stopped struggling after a while, and not a sound could be heard from him. He was dead. Chapter 209. 2. All who covet Qing has to die. Lingyu tossed the disciple, who was no longer breathing, down onto the ground, before finally raising his head up. His mouth was smeared all over in blood, the expression on his face maniacal. "So delicious." His eyes were bright red, looking like a monster with an insatiable thirst for blood. He then lifted his hand that was covered in blood, and licked his tongue over his fingers for a taste, his eyes gazing greedily at the whole bunch of food in front of him. His expression became incredibly excited as he howled, "Blood! I want blood! I want more blood!" The moment his voice fell, his body moved very quickly to charge towards the several people closest to him. His two hands were like the sharpest weapons there was, instantly piercing right through two people's chest, before he pulled his hands back quickly to continue attacking other people. It immediately turned into a chaotic scene, and terrified screams broke out all over the place. Lu Junyao was standing not too far away from there, and his eyes were dark, deep as ink, a silent surge rising up within as the tall figure stood, not moving an inch. The man who had lost his mind was caught up in the fervor of uninhibited slaughter, and the ground was already littered with many dead bodies in myriad positions. All of that was happening not too far away from them, but standing in their positions, they were able to see everything that was happening down below. There was blood everywhere, staining the ground beneath their feet a grisly red. There were several people with rather good levels of cultivation fighting him and trying to take him down, but it did not seem to have much of an effect. It was as if the enemy had taken some booster drugs and was sweeping through everything before it. Watching that scene, Qingbei could not help but feel a little flustered. "What should we do? He will catch up with us here very soon," Lu Junyao said indifferently. "It's not him." The youth looked at him puzzledly, not knowing what he meant by those words. "It's them." As Lu Junyao's voice fell, Qingbei immediately knew what the man meant in the very next instant. Because from the next level below on those steps, the sound of an intense flurry of footsteps could then be heard. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Saying there was an intense flurry to describe it was not exaggerated in the least, as what reached everyone's ears was a chaotic mess of footsteps. That kind of number cannot be described as merely many, but could be said to be terrifying. What is happening here? Both Qingbei's eyes and ears could be said to have suddenly gone numb. Before him, Countless droopy-headed, stiff-bodied people with tattered clothes and their hands, hanging limply by their sides, had suddenly appeared. The reason they are called people was because they looked human on the outside. But there were many other things that were not like what normal humans would do. For example, the manner they walked. Their steps were sluggish as they staggered unsteadily, like they were not that mobile, but their pace was neatly uniform as they came to appear before his eyes. Chapter 209. 3. All who covet Qing has to die. Qing stared with his eyes wide. All these happenings. Puppets. Lu Junyao slowly came to open his mouth to say, his face calm and tranquil without showing the slightest ripple of emotion. Using dead bodies who have barely just breathed their last, and were not completely dead to turn into puppets. They are several times stronger than those puppets created from dead corpses. Hearing that, Qing then turned to look back at the man who was still on a killing rampage. Why did that faint mist sect disciple become like that? It must be because he was bitten by a puppet and did not die, but got tainted by the puppet's evil and deathly aura, turning into a bloodthirsty monster, who is neither man nor ghost. Lu Junyao explained. His gaze then turned back to look at the constantly nearing puppets, who were making strange sounds with their mouths, the expression his face looking a little complicated. To think that such a thing would appear here in the Carefree Valley, within the fleeting cloud fortress. If it was just purely the friendship meet between the sects, such a thing should not have appeared. And even if he possessed such a thing, Ji Yanlong would not have the audacity to release such monsters. Among the people who came today, many of them were prominent people of high position in these lands. If something happened to them while they were here in the Carefree Valley, Ji Yanlong would not be able to answer for it to the outside world. The puppetry technique was a skill lost to the world for many years, and not to mention here in this low-level land. It was rare to see even in Cloud Heaven itself. But despite that, this was already the second time that he was seeing puppets like this in this low-level lands. It was not known when the man's irises had broken its illusory magic and had turned an intense violet. Under all that frantic chaos happening all around, no one would notice the change in his eyes. With those devilish eyes uncaged, they immediately received a memory fragment from one of the puppets. It showed the fuzzy image of a man's figure, but the glib and evil-sounding voice was just too familiar that it refreshed one's memory, or at least that memory came to leave a very deep impression in Lu Junyao's mind. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The fuzzy figure of the man became clear. It was a gently handsome-looking man, his countenance as good-looking as a god's. But in the very next instant, that handsome-looking face twisted up evilly. Lu Baiqian, if you are to die here today, it is all your own doing. Of all the things you should not have and must not have done, you shouldn't have set your eyes on my Qing. Qing belongs to me. Her body, her soul, every single strand of hair on her head, they are all mine. Anyone who covets her, I will make them pay the price. And you, not only did you covet Qing, you even seek to possess her. Absolutely unpardonable. I will make you suffer the greatest pain there is in this world. I will make you suffer a fate worse than death. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 209. 4. All who covet Qing has to die. The memory stopped there, and there was nothing after that. Lu Junyao turned his gaze away. It's that man after all. Besides that guy, nobody would be able to create so many puppets. Looks like the many kinds of danger here today were all set up just for him. Huh, that is so thoughtful of him. To think that there would be such a crazed and perverted man in this world, who would harbor such shameless and insidious thoughts towards his own younger sister. How much more immorally corrupt could one be? The violet irises flashed with a bright glint, and he suddenly remembered something. Keep this with you. The young lady handed a black porcelain bottle over to him and said, make sure you keep this safely on you. It will be useful at the most critical juncture. What is it? He asked as he took it, giving it a shake. There was the sound of something sloshing inside, like it was some kind of liquid. This is my blood, the only way we know of countering the puppetry technique at the moment. Ordinary techniques have no effect against the puppetry technique, and as those puppets are monsters impenetrable with blades or knife, unable to feel pain or exhaustion, no matter how powerful you are, and they are not able to hurt you at all. A swarm of ants can still bring down an elephant. They do not tire, but the time where your energy depletes will come, so remember to not clash head-on with them. He was a little confused as he stared at the tiny bottle in his hand. I saw how much you bled in order to defeat those puppets. With this tiny thing here. He had not even finished with his words when Qingyu understood what he was trying to say. She was silent for a moment before she said softly, "This is blood from the tip of my heart. The heart's blood of the purest bloodline. The power in one single drop of this is more than 100 times stronger than my regular blood. How could you be so foolish? Don't you know how dangerous it is? How can you do that? What if something happened to you?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Qingyu's eyes were serious as she looked at him. She then said, "That guy will definitely avenge any humiliation inflicted onto him. Having failed this time, he will not give up. I do not want you to meet with any danger because of me. I do not wish for you to get implicated, but you have already been dragged into this, and he will not let you off. Remember what I am telling you. If you meet him, do not clash head-on with him. You might be very highly skilled and few can stand up to you in Cloud Heaven. But powers exist in these lands that you are not able to fight against, and his puppetry techniques is one of them." Lu Junyao slowly came back to his senses, and his large smooth had slowly pulled out a black porcelain bottle. He gently pulled off the stopper, and the powerful aura of the blood wafted out. The puppet that had been approaching aggressively immediately retreated a step back in fear, like it was suddenly frightened of something, not daring to take another step forward. Those were probably a bunch of low-leveled puppets that were controlled to carry out orders, but they were still able to instinctively sense things that posed to be of grave danger, and all of them did not dare to go another step forward. Very soon, an evil and sinister-sounding voice quickly rose in their minds to convey an order. "Kill that man." Chapter 210. 1. Will not let you die. Upon hearing that voice, the puppets that were all being hesitant and fearful suddenly started to stir once more. Maybe the instinctive fear they felt inside was being overtaken by the control on their bodies, driving away the fear, even though the scent wafting out from the little porcelain bottle was able to make them lose their lives. They no longer retreated, and there was only one thing on their minds. Kill. Lu Junyao narrowed his eyes, and he dripped one single droplet of blood onto a fingertip. The blood droplet then shot out, splitting into countless tiny specks as they tore through the horde of puppets in a sweep. Immediately, painful howls rang out in relentless waves. The specks of blood that were too small to be seen were unbelievably damaging. When they landed on the puppets, they burned holes through their bodies with plumes of white smoke rising up. All those blood droplets did not only damage their skin and flesh on the surface, but tore up the nerves inside, intensifying the pain they felt by many times, which brought their lurching advance to a halt. But Lu Junyao did not let his guard down, as he stretched a hand out to pull Qingbei standing a short distance away to his side and said, "Do not turn your head back. Just keep making your way up." Qingbei was taken aback with shock. "What about you? I can settle this, but you'll be holding me back by remaining here," Lu Junyao said harshly, and then gave him a slight push forward. Caught off guard with that push, Qingbei almost stumbled over his feet. Humiliated by those words which made him seem so useless, he could not help but feel a little angry, immediately turning himself around and leaving in a huff. But he had just taken a few steps when he remembered Qingyu's reminder to him that he must not separate from this man. Not exactly knowing why, but maybe he was so used to trusting Qingyu. Qingbei's footsteps came to a halt, hesitating as he did not know whether he should continue to move forward. But that momentary pause caused him to feel a gust of sinister wind to blow over his back, and he quickly turned his head around. A puppet suddenly came leaping straight at him, his face malevolent as he lunged forward with a bite. Qingbei's eyes flared wide as he stared, seeing the terrifying puppet magnifying right before his eyes as the puppet came closer. Just as the monster came within punching distance, the puppet suddenly fell with a howl, his body twitching incessantly. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He slowly came back to his senses from the shock, and he saw the purple-robed man's handsome face turn grave, his violet eyes staring darkly at him as he said, "Why are you standing there in a daze? Didn't I ask you to leave quickly? If anything happened to this foolish little kid, wouldn't the little fox extend her claws and scratch him to his death?" Qingbei creased up his brows, his eyes staring intently on the man. "You're hurt." On the man's clearly defined hand, and upon his slim palm, bright red blood could be seen slowly flowing down. The bright red of the blood a stark contrast against his fair skin. Lu Junyao lowered his eyes to look at his hand. He got scratched by a puppet lunging at him in a moment of carelessness earlier. Chapter 210. 2. Will not let you die without waiting for the man to open his mouth to reply. Qingbei was already saying with strong resolve, "I will definitely not hold you back." The moment his voice fell, he had already rushed his way right among the puppets, hurling brutal lightning energy blades to sweep across the horde of puppets. In an instant, the bodies of all the puppets were covered with a crackling electrifying purplish-blue light, as they fell to writhe in spasms on the ground, howling incessantly. Right before their eyes, the puppets seemed to be in great pain, and were at a disadvantage. But very soon, they quickly recovered back their strength. These puppets could not be killed, because it was not known what their weakness was, and it did not affect them no matter which spot they were struck. Even though the puppets could be made to stop attacking for a while, that was still not a solution after all, as the time will come when their own powers would be drained. But these things before them did not know exhaustion, nor were they afraid of pain. Lu Junyao's face darkened, his eyes looking at the wound on his hand. The blood was slowly turning dark red, a faint black tinge rising within. Anyone bitten by these puppets would be infected, and turned into a monster with no awareness, but it was not such a severe situation for him, as he was born with a unique body constitution. In addition to that, Qingyu had helped him nurse and recuperate his body, a blessing gained out of misfortune. The expression on his face suddenly turned sharp as the violet orb stared at the blood on his hand, seemingly having thought of something. He had recalled the time back when the little fox's body had freezed up. The golden-haired youth had said back then that since the little fox's blood flowed within his body, he was the only other one in the world to possess the blood from the purest bloodline, the blood of light. Maybe he might have come up with a solution. Blood of the purest bloodline, where light and darkness were melded together. Its power would be magnified by more than just a few times. PFFF, far away in the White Fens lands at the Feng family manor, a gentle handsome-looking man suddenly spurted out a big mouthful of blood. His eyes opened slowly, as a sinister glint flashed within. He lifted his hand to wipe away the blood at the corner of his mouth, and curled up his lips into a sneer. They had actually managed to break the spell of my puppetry technique. How is that possible? How could that man's blood and Qing Qing's blood possibly undo his puppetry technique when they are mixed together? What did that represent? Has Qing Qing and that man? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That cannot be possible. Any possibility of that happening cannot even be allowed at all. The power of the purest bloodline has caused large areas of the maniacal puppets' bodies to corrode, leaving behind puddles of bloody fluid, which gave off a most foul stench. "Let's go." Lu Junyao's voice was low and deep, immediately turning around to quickly move upwards on those steps. They had already reached 1/3 of their way up the fleeting cloud fortress, and all that could be seen below was a bottomless black abyss, where it seemed like something was slowing, making its way up soundlessly and undetected. Chapter 210. 3. Will not let you die. Shi Zhanchen and his men had left before everyone, and had kept themselves a step ahead of Lu Junyao. With their speed, they were rather surprised that someone had actually managed to catch up with them. Upon seeing the several men in front, Lu Junyao was also slightly surprised at first, and his violet eyes then turned sharp as he opened his mouth to say, "Move on quickly. Something's chasing us, and catching up fast from behind." "What?" Shi Zhanchen was initially surprised by how the man's eyes had changed in color, but upon hearing what the man said, He could not help but ask in bewilderment. It's too late for any of you to escape. Accompanying that incredibly evil-sounding voice, a thick dark black mist descended from the skies, enveloping over 1,000 miles around, a surreal sight manifesting before their eyes. The black mist came to take on a humanoid shape, suspended in midair as it looked down at the group of people from high above, swirling thickly with contempt. What kind of a damned creature are you? The toweringly tall and burly Ihan asked with his face darkened, before he threw out a violently heavy punch. The powerful gust of wind kicked up by the punch seemed like it was almost going to tear the air itself apart. If that strike had struck onto a person's body, it would surely end up being smashed up into countless pieces. But his attack was doomed to miss this time. The black mist broke out in scoffing laughter and held the punch that Ihan threw frozen in midair. The very next second, the expression on that brash and rugged face twisted up, and a heart-rending cry burst forth from his mouth. A mere pesky insect who does not know his own limits. The black mist said with utter disdain in its voice. Ihan! The towering body crashed heavily to the ground, and Feng Qi and Yanju rushed over to check on the man. The two men suddenly teared up upon seeing the brutally bloody scene that met their eyes. Ihan's body was twitching uncontrollably, his face deathly pale, and his breath barely just a thin sliver. The sleeve of his robe had been torn off, and only one half of the bones in his hand was left, smattered with blood. A black mist was still swirling around the wound, like it was seeking to burrow into the man's body. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You get away from him! Yanju shouted with his eyes reddened, standing up, and was all prepared to fight the black misty mass to the death. But Shi Zhanchen held up a hand to block him off. Chief! Yanju shouted angrily. Don't stop me from killing that bastard. Shi Zhanchen looked at the man expressionlessly and said, You will only end up delivering yourself to your own death if you go. They still did not know what the black mist really is, and even he himself is not entirely confident he is able to stand against such a foe, let alone the others whose cultivation levels were lower than his. Ha 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 ha. All of you insignificant insects. There is no need to stubbornly persist in futility. Obediently accept that death is upon all of you. The black mist laughed loudly in pure unbridled arrogance. Chapter 210. 4. Will not let you die. What do we do? Watching the scene, Qingbei could not help but knit up his brows. He believed that his level of cultivation was not low, and could be considered to be one of the more highly skilled pugilists throughout these lands. But against this supernatural manifestation of evil before him, he found himself completely clueless. But for some unknown reason, the man beside him gave him a strange sense of security, just like the feeling that Qin Yu always gave him every time. Seemingly able to sense the youth's frustration, Lu Junyao lowered his eyes and his voice was low and magnetic. Rest assured. I will not let you die. Upon saying that, those eyes then cast an expressionless gaze upon the black mist suspended in midair. The laughing black mist mass that was blustering with haughty arrogance suddenly froze for a moment, instinctively sensing danger. Turning to gaze towards the source of imminent danger, it met the man's highly devilish and mesmerizing pair of violet orbs, and saw a silent surge with them. The humanoid figure formed out of black mist unconsciously then shrank back warily. It's him! The man that Master wants to kill. Just who is this man? To think that he would have such a terrifying gaze. Even though the black mist mass did not possess a flesh body, it could still sense the danger and fear rising up in its heart. The black mist mass struggled internally for a while, but then gritted its teeth to overcome the fear it felt inside. The humanoid figure then transformed, to split into countless masses of black mist that surrounded the group of people completely. At that same moment, Lu Junyao's eyes changed, and a deep violet tinge came over his eyes, rising from deep within. All the trees and plants around, together with the rocks on the ground, were suddenly thrown up into the air by a maniacally strong wind that came to form into an incredibly powerful twisting hurricane. The next moment, it was as if every single one of them had gained its own awareness, each growing 4 limbs and a body as they started to walk over the ground, surrounding the group of people within a deadly circle. Lu Junyao then said expressionlessly, "These things will only hold us back for a while. We will have to move much more quickly. The entire fleeting cloud fortress must be filled with danger everywhere now, and the only safe place for us would be at the highest point at the top." He had come to understand that these were things that should not appear in a mere friendship meet between the sects. And the Carefree Valley's Valley Chief must be in cahoots with that guy behind it all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You hearing that? Shi Zhanchun was in agreement, and his eyes turned to look at the frail and weakened Ihan lying on the ground. "How are you feeling? Are you able to walk?" His face white as a sheet, Ihan slowly stood up with help from Feng Qi and Yanju. "I can walk. I cannot die so ignobly here. I must not disgrace the assassin's temple like this." On the many thousands of steps in the fleeting cloud fortress, the path narrowed the higher they went. At the start, more than 10 people were able to move abreast at the same time, but after going several thousand steps up, the width only allowed 2 people to move side by side together. And if one was brawny and of a stocky build, they might have to walk sideways, their bodies slanted to one side. The more timid ones were not even able to look down at all, as it was really too high up. If they became overwhelmed by fear and fell off, it would be a most unjust and humiliating death. Chapter 211. 1. Game of Death. In contrast to the many dangers that filled the path through the other entrance, it was smooth sailing for Qing Yu and the others on their side, where in less than an hour's time, they were expected to reach the top. "I wonder how things are over on my big brother's side." Ming Yi and Qing Yu were walking side by side, when she suddenly opened her mouth to say. Qing Yu raised an eyebrow to look at her. "What's wrong? I can't help having a bad feeling about it." Ming Yi creased up her pretty-looking face. By right, the 2 entrances into the fleeting cloud fortress should be the same, and the dangerous obstacles set up in them should not be that different. But look at us here. Aren't things too smooth sailing for us here, compared to the peace and tranquility here? Would all the dangerous traps then have been diverted over to the other entrance? What you said is rather logical. Qing Yu nodded slightly as she replied. She narrowed her eyes as she contemplated on it for a moment, and then lifted up a hand. The purple communication orb suddenly appeared in her hand, but when she injected her spirit powers into it, there was no response for a long while. Qing Yu was a little puzzled. This shouldn't happen, right? That fella had even said to her that she must definitely call out to him if they met with any danger, so it was not possible that he would sever the communication link on his side. So what has actually happened? Lu Junyao. She tried to inject her spirit power into the orb once more, to summon up the man on the other side, but there was still no response. Her heart grew heavy. Could something really have happened? That fellow was someone who came down here from Cloud Heaven. How could anything in these low-level lands possibly be able to hold him down? Unless... That thought was still on her mind when the crystal orb suddenly pulsed in her hand, a dark scarlet shade filling up inside. Today, all of you will die here. A voice so familiar that she would never be able to forget it suddenly reached her ears, causing her eyes to flare wide in an instant. That aura of evil could be felt even through the crystal orb. Upon hearing that voice, the other girls beside Qing Yu were also immensely shocked, and Ming Yi immediately asked worriedly, "Who is this? Have they really met with danger over on the men's side?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Yu's fingers tightened around the crystal orb in her hand, gripping it tightly in her palm. Her voice was bone-chillingly cold as her voice sounded, pausing in between each word. "Qing Tianlin, what are you thinking of doing?" Although unable to see the scene over on the other side, she knew that the man was definitely watching her from behind the scenes, and knew every single move she made. As expected, the moment those words came out of her mouth, the man's voice then rose from inside the crystal orb. In stark contrast to the sinister and evil-sounding one just now, the voice was now gentle, like it came from one's lover, as it murmured, "I am thinking of possessing you." Qing Qing. Qing Yu's face grew dark, like a layer of icy frost had formed over that exquisite face. "What have you done to them?" Chapter 211. 2. Game of Death. Them? Who are the them that Ching is referring to? The man's voice was a little puzzled, seemingly not knowing what she was talking about. Don't act dumb with me. Why is something that belongs to him in your hands? TSK, you mean that violet eyes monster? Speaking of that pair of eyes are really something, aren't they? Like a pair of precious stones. If they are dug out and made into decorative ornaments, they would definitely become a treasure that's one of a kind. You maniac. Don't touch him. Qing Yu's composure broke. If you dare to hurt him, I will never let you off for it. Oh, then it should be alright for me to make a move on these people, right? As his voice fell, the deep scarlet shade in the crystal orb faded away, and the figure of Qing Bei appeared. His face was pale, and there were traces of blood at the corner of his mouth. The image in the crystal orb suddenly changed, and Shi Zhanchan was seen inside. He was leaning against a rock surface, his body tightly bound by chains formed from a black mist. The more he struggled, the tighter the chains constricted around him, a trickle of bright red blood spilling out over his thin lips. There were a number of other disciples taking part in the friendship meet, and they were all covered in wounds. Some of them their bodies badly tattered, and in bad shape, barely alive, and hanging on their very last breaths. Qing Yu's knuckles turned white. You've harmed so many people. Aren't you afraid of retribution from heaven? Retribution from heaven? The man laughed softly. Those are just lies to fool people. Qing is really so adorable to actually believe in such things. If this so-called heaven's retribution really exists, then I who carry the weight of so many sins on me would already have died heaven knows how many countless times. Qing, there is a little brat here as well. Is he your younger brother from this life? I heard that you care a lot for him, and that man with violet eyes. It seems like your relationship with him is rather close as well. Let's play a game here. I'll give you half an hour's time, and you have to find their location. Choose one out of these two people, and if you still have not arrived after half an hour's time, I will throw both of them over the fleeting cloud fortress. Oh, you need not hold any hope of getting a lucky break out of this. That man does indeed possess deep and unfathomable cultivation, and was not easy to deal with. I really might not be his match in a one-on-one fight, but unfortunately, I possess the most powerful puppetry technique throughout the lands, and added to the fact that his heart is filled with thoughts of you. A mere illusion was all it took to make him fall into my trap easily. You must not hurt him. Qing Yu roared softly through tightly gritted teeth. Don't worry. The half hour's still not up, so I will not do anything to him, but just make him suffer a little, that's all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Qing Tian Lin. I'll be waiting for you, Qing. Come quickly, alright. The image in the crystal orb was suddenly cut off, and it reverted back to its original state. Mu Lai and Ming Yi could understand how Qing Yu must be feeling at that moment, and they both did not want to bother her, but just waited for her to calm her emotions. Chapter 211. 3. Game of Death. After a while, her voice was heard saying apathetically, Time's running out. Gather close, all of you. We'll take ourselves straight up to the top through a dimensional portal. The dimensional portal, a high-level technique that existed only in the higher-level lands, which allows one to pass through space and time at an extremely fast speed, cutting unnecessary waste of time by shortening the distance of a journey. The few of them tried to hide the surprise that rose up in their eyes as they slowly stepped in closer to Qing Yu's side. They then saw the young lady chant a spell with an icy expression on her face, before she gestured grandly with a wave of her hand. The figures of the several people suddenly disappeared from the spot they had been standing in, to enter into an all-white world. The space beneath their feet whizzed by and millions of light specks fleeted past them at dizzying speed. The few of them who had never gone through a dimensional portal found it all curiously amazing. What are all these light specks? Mulai could not help but to ask curiously. Qing Yu started to explain. In order to save time that will pass, we are now in a portal of space and time. As the passage of time cannot be stopped, everything has been turned onto these countless specks of light. Since there is a way to save time, does that also mean that if there is an event that I want to redo one more time, There is a way for us to actually go back in time. Ming Yi attempted a guess. There is indeed a way to go back in time, but turning back the hands of time is an act that goes against the will of heaven. So the person performing the spell will have to pay an equivalent price in return. Qing Yu's gaze turned sharp. Such a method would not be carelessly employed by anyone, as the price to pay in exchange was just much too heavy. You bastard! Let me go! Tied to the boulders and unable to struggle free, Yanju could not help but opened his mouth to curse angrily. In the more than 20 years he had lived, when did he ever have to suffer such aggravating aggrievement? As a member of the Assassin's Temple, not to mention that everyone from the Carefree Valley had to bend their backs before him in reverence, even when he's out and around, who wouldn't quiver in their boots upon hearing his name as Smiling Hades. To think that he would stumble here like this today, which was the greatest humiliation to him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But that was not the worst, but the fact that he was shamefully tied up and bound here in the Fleeting Cloud Fortress, within the Carefree Valley's territory. Stop howling already and save your strength. Otherwise it would not be fun in a while. The humanoid figure formed out of black mist said contemptuously. At that moment, only Yanju and Ihan, who had lost an arm, an immobile cripple, could be seen there, and everyone else had disappeared. Yanju clenched his jaws tightly together. Where have you taken our chief? You're not even able to take care of yourself, and you're still worrying for others. The black mist said sarcastically. Chapter 211. For Game of Death, where did all you monsters really come from? It's not possible for anyone in these constellation lands to possess such maniacally high levels of cultivation, and you are all using techniques that we have never even heard of. Are you people from one of the higher realms? Yanju tried to guess, and then remembered something. If people from a higher realm harms a person from a lower realm, they will be punished by the heavens. Whoa, heaven's punishment. I'm so scared. Ha ha ha. The black mist laughed arrogantly, and then said, My master is someone even the heavens would be wary to punish. Would I need to fear such a thing? What a joke! But all you puny insects here would be making your way to eternal paradise very soon. So you do not have to worry yourself with such devious scheming and people fighting to gain an edge over others in this world anymore. At the highest point of the Fleeting Cloud Fortress, one would see just an endless night sky looking out from the palace. It was truly high among the clouds, several cloud plumes floating around the palace within one's reach. Standing at such a high point, it was really an experience like no other. It would be dawn in another few hours. The gently good-looking man said with a gentle smile on his lips, almost like it was driving back the chilly wind under the silvery cold moon. So soothing one almost felt like it was the spring breeze blowing over their bodies. In a suit of white robes untainted by a single speck of dust, looking like a high and mighty revered deity, a man stood submissively with his head lowered behind. Isn't that the Carefree Valley's Valley Chief Ji Yanlong? He was standing about 2 to 3 steps distance away from the man, his gaze carefully measuring up the other 2 people over the edge of the palace grounds. Their bodies were hung suspended in the air, looking as if the slightest movement would cause them to fall into the dark bottomless abyss. Just who are these 2 people? That they could make the master bring them up here personally himself. What? You're curious about them? The man's voice was filled with mirth as it reached him softly. Ji Yanlong was immediately covered in cold sweat, and his head sank even lower as he said in horror, Your subordinate would not dare. That such a dignified entity famed throughout the lands, holder of the highest authority over one of the 3 great sects, would be so servile and submissive before another person, was a shocking scene to see. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. No need to be so nervous. The man laughed softly and patted Ji Yanlong on his shoulder. You'll find out in a while. Just stand back and enjoy the show. Ji Yanlong immediately bowed obsequiously in agreement. The tall white figure went slowly closer, and raised his chin slightly to look upon the expressionless face of the man. He then curled up the corners of his lips and said, Wonder if Qing will be able to rush her way here in half an hour's time. If she slips up and comes here late, then the game would already be over. Lu Junyao's face still showed no emotion, like he could not be bothered with the man at all. His gaze glanced at the unconscious youth who had his eyes closed. This kid is injured, really don't know how much longer he can hold up. Seeing that, the man was not angry, but showed an indiscernible smile on his face to ask, "Tell me, do you think Qing will choose to let the boy die or you?" Chapter 212. 1. It's one's own flesh on both the front and back of one's hand. Lu Junyao did not show much change in emotions throughout it all, and upon hearing those words, he merely lifted a corner of his lips as he said indifferently, "You took so much effort and did so many things merely seeking to gain her attention, even though you will only make her detest you more, thinking that you're just a shameless pervert through and through. What did you say?" Qing Tianlin's gaze darkened in an instant, his gentle and graceful countenance twisting up. "Say that one more time. Do you believe that I'll kill you right this moment? If you're really able to kill me, would you have waited till now?" Lu Junyao curled up his lips into a contemptuous smile. "If you had not employed sly and crafty tricks, how could a character like you be able to do anything to me?" The handsome face with its flawless features was filled with a kind of noble haughtiness that showed no regard for anything. The mesmerizing violet irises, imbued with an unstoppable power, that made people could not help but fall deeply immersed into that devilishly alluring sea of violet purple. Qing Tianlin turned his gaze away, after looking into those eyes for 2 seconds, forcibly repressing the discomfort that was rising up in his heart. Eyes of the devil indeed, that possessed irresistible powers of the devil. But so what? Isn't he tightly bound up and unable to move at all right this moment? This man, one would know that he was an exceptional person, just by looking at his extraordinary outlook. Qing Tianlin had not been able to find out anything about the man's identity, even though he had secretly investigated into it. But that pair of devilish eyes was something he had a slight impression of. That was the trademark of the Netherworld's Night Dark tribe from far ancient times. But how could it be so coincidental? If he is really a descendant from the bloodline of the Netherworld's Night Dark tribe, he would really cannot carelessly make any moves against the man. Even when he comes to ascend to the highest position in the future, there are still some people he would have to keep at a respectful distance, and not to offend them carelessly. An example would be the Netherworld's Night Dark tribe, who had held incredible power in far ancient times. It was said that they were the earliest ancestors and origin of the evil factions, where all the other so-called righteous and orthodox factions of light were unable to blunt their increasingly sharp edge back then. But throughout the vestiges of time and inevitable change, who knew whether that powerful tribe of legend still existed? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ugh. The youth with his good-looking features slowly stirred awake, the pain on his body causing him to knit his brows. Upon discovering the state he was in at that moment, the expression on his face became a little surprised. His eyes scanned the surroundings and saw the man similarly hanging suspended in midair beside him, and he started to say in utter disbelief, You've come awake?" Lu Junyao curved up his lips into a smile. "It's good that you've regained consciousness. Where are we now?" Chapter 212. 2. It's one's own flesh on both the front and back of one's hand. Qing Bei did not know how to react. Why are they in a completely foreign place the moment he woke up? And he seems to be unable to move his body. And doesn't this man possess unsurpassing skill? How did he end up being tied up and left hanging in the air just like he is? Lu Junyao saw the shock in the youth's gaze, and he said rather helplessly, "It's just as you see. We are now trapped and under the enemy's control. We are now at the Fleeting Cloud Fortress highest level. With such great powers, how is anyone able to defeat you? There was nothing I could do. As a righteous gentleman of honor, when pitted against such a sly and scheming scum, I was naturally disadvantaged." Lu Junyao said with a serious face, looking slightly aggrieved as he hung his head, like he was frustrated at having been outplayed by the sneaky and treacherous tricks, only because he was too upright and righteous. Qing Bei was speechless. Actually, he just did not want to say it out loud to him. but with such devilish good looks that could bring ruin to a country and its people, you do not look that good a person yourself. When Qing Tianlin saw that the two of them were still in the mood for idle chit-chat like that, he could not help but scoff disdainfully. Calculating the time that had passed, half an hour should almost be up. If Qing still does not come, the two of them can only pray in their hearts to the heavens that their bodies will remain in one piece after they fall off. Compared to the other two who were hanging dangerously suspended over the edge outside the fleeting cloud fortress, Shi Zhanchun was instead locked up against a pillar inside the palace. The black iron chains were so tightly bound around him that his already thin body was almost deformed. He had attempted to break free from them earlier, but found that nothing he did was of any help, the chains just binding him more tightly to the pillar, and he had then given up. The sound of footsteps came in from outside the palace, and Shi Zhanchun slowly raised his eyes up. The white figure came before his eyes in a moment, and a slender hand then held his chin, forcing his head up to look at the face of the man gazing down at him. The corners of Qing Tianlin's lips were still curled up in a gentle smile, but the fingers holding Shi Zhanchun's chin were gripping it tightly, like he could easily break the man's jaw. Having remained outside for such a long time, could you have come to forget what you are? Shi Zhanchun's eyes darkened, but he did not say anything. Covered with filth, are you even worthy of coveting someone as different to you as mud is to the clouds? Qing Tianlin slowly leaned in closer to the man's ear to say slowly, I created you, just to have you betray me? My slave. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I am sorry, Master. Shi Zhanchun's voice was weak. I was just unable to control my own heart. Ho ho! Since you're unable to control it, what use would we have with such a disloyal heart? Might as well just dig it out and feed it to all your cheap and lowly peers to get rid myself of it. Qing Tianlin scoffed in disdain, his words mercilessly cruel, and he then slowly raised a hand to rest upon the man's chest. Shi Zhanchun closed his eyes, and there wasn't a single sliver of fear or panic on his face, like he no longer had the will to live anymore. He's had enough. Enough of all the blood and slaughter, a life he lived only to kill, fated to be manipulated by others. To have been able to meet a person that moved his heart so deep inside his soul before his death, he had no regrets. Chapter 212. 3. It's one's own flesh on both the front and back of one's hand. Qingyu and the several others in the dimensional portal reached the fleeting cloud fortress top level very quickly. Although Ming Yi and Qian Yun had stronger mental powers than most people, their body's constitution were however weaker. Hence when they came out from the dimensional portal, their faces were a little pale. Mulai did not feel much discomfort, as she had been used to wandering around the lands from a young age, having encountered all kinds of hostile and inhospitable environments, so she was able to adapt much better. The higher one went, the narrower the space became. When the dimensional portal opened, Qingyu almost lost her footing as she stepped out. Fortunately, she was able to catch herself quickly enough to right herself up. There was a magnificently majestic palace that looked to have been built long ago from far ancient times on the top level, with nothing else on the top level, which made the place feel vast and empty. When they went closer to the palace, they discovered that only Qingyu was able to go inside. Mulai and Ming Yi had just gone closer to the palace when they found themselves pushed back out by a barrier array, which should be what Qing Tianlin had intended. Qingyu narrowed her eyes to scan over her surroundings with a measuring gaze, before her eyes froze fixedly upon two human figures hanging suspended in the air beside the palace over the edge, where it seemed like the slightest movement would cause them to drop off, caught in a highly precarious situation. She immediately went walking over quickly towards them, and saw the two familiar faces, just as she had expected. Lu Junyao, little Bei, are you guys all right? Qingyu asked worriedly. Qingyu, you do not have to worry. I am fine. Qingyu put on a reassuring smile on the corners of his lips, and said comfortingly. Lu Junyao narrowed his eyes, and the tone of his voice sounded rather displeased. You really came here? Qingyu raised an eyebrow to stare at him. You still have the cheek to say that? What did I tell you earlier? This is just great. When Bai Jiyan and the others come to find out how you've been tricked and taken hostage, I'll then like to see how you can still maintain your prestige and hold authority over them. How infuriating. She had thought that coming in with this fella would allow him to help look after little Bai. In the end, here he is getting himself caught by the enemy himself. Lu Junyao heard her admonishing tone and merely arched up an eyebrow, but did not say anything. It was instead Qing Bei who cried out in his defense. Qingyu, he cannot be blamed for any of this, as I was fortunate to have him protecting me the entire way. If not for that despicable lord who used you to threaten him, he would not have fallen into their trap and get himself captured at all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You kid, you talk too much. Lu Junyao glared at him. Qingyu was confused for a moment before she started to ask haltingly, "Use me? To threaten him? What does that mean?" Qing Bei ignored the man's eyes who was signaling for him to shut up, and went on to say, "That person tricked us and trapped us in an illusion, which had a fake you inside who was right about to be killed. But this fella here thought that illusory figure was really you, and used his own body to ward off the killing blow." Chapter 212. 4. It's one's own flesh on both the front and back of one's hand. Qing Bei did not continue to tell what happened after that. But Qingyu was already able to guess at the ending without needing the youth to say anything. In order to break and dispel an illusory attack, one would have to overcome their own weakness portrayed in the illusion. Only by overcoming one's insurmountable weakness would one be able to walk out from the attack. But Lu Junyao did not do that, as that person in the illusion had been Qingyu. He had not had any weaknesses before, until this young lady suddenly came crashing straight right into his world, and he was completely defenseless against it. If he could make himself allow the young lady in the illusion to be killed, he could have just walked out from that illusion easily, but the man could not. Because that was Qingyu in there, the young lady that he cared the most for, and he could never allow her to be in the slightest bit of danger, even though he knew that it was all not real. Qingyu's eyes narrowed with a glint, her feelings rather complicated inside. In that one moment, she was suddenly unable to grasp and understand the kind of emotions rising up inside her. Was she moved? But it feels a little more complex than just being moved. She just did not understand it. She slowly raised her eyes up to look at the man, indifferent and nonchalant man. She did not know what to feel, but was somehow rather vexed and frustrated. "You fool, do not do such a thing anymore next time. You would really lose big time if you had paid for it with your life in such a senseless gamble." Lu Junyao's face was serious. "It wasn't a gamble." Pausing a moment, he then added, "If the same thing happens again, I will still make the same choice." Qingyu scoffed and went on to say, "You say it as if I am someone very important to you." Very important." He quickly followed up with this statement. Qing Bei sensed that the atmosphere had turned a little queer. Why does it feel like these two people are seemingly flirting with each other? You might just be mistaken here. But the most important thing before her was to get the two of them off the edge first. It was not known what kind of technique Qing Tianlin used to trap the two of them in their spots, making it impossible for them to even move. "Are you able to move at all?" Qingyu turned to look at Lu Junyao and asked. "It should be some kind of binding technique. Why don't you try and see if you are able to break the spell in some way?" Lu Junyao smiled and shook his head. "He carved the puppetry technique into my body, so I will not be able to break the spell." The primer for the puppetry technique was a person's blood, and Qingyu then subconsciously scanned her eyes over his body. She then came to find a trace of what she was looking for. A few small holes in those lavish robes. The cloth in that area was slightly darkened, and she saw dried blood on the back of the man's hand. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qingyu knitted her brows, and was just about to do something to rescue the two of them, when the two people, who were hanging suspended in midair, suddenly had the distance between them pulled several meters further apart, before their bodies plummeted straight down. At such a great speed and so far apart from each other, Qingyu would only be able to save one. Impossible for her to care for both sides. Qing Tianlin had only given her half an hour, and he must not have meant to have her rush here within that half hour, but wanted her to save the two of them within that time. And it was with the two of them separated. He was forcing her to make a choice. She could only choose one among the two, and the other one would fall while completely defenseless, where it could only mean certain death. Chapter 213. 1. Kissing is something one becomes familiar with after the first time Qing Yu took a deep breath, and before she could even do anything, she heard Lu Junyao's low and magnetic voice say, "Save that kid." Qing Yu clenched her jaws tightly together and glared at him. "Shut up. I will not give up on either of you." The moment her voice fell, her body was already moving very quickly to grab the youth, who was a distance away from her, barely able to just get a grip on his clothes to pull him up. Without even stopping to catch her breath, she sped towards the spot where Lu Junyao fell. But as the place he had fallen was rather far away from her, she would not be able to grab him and pull him up anymore. With that realization, Qing Yu's brows furrowed and her body suddenly went headlong over the edge, barely hanging on by the tips of her feet, as she stretched her hand out to grab upon Lu Junyao's clothes at his shoulder. "Give me your hand. I'll pull you up." Qing Yu stretched her other hand out towards him, but her face did not show the slightest sliver of strain or toil. One could not help but be bewildered how such a petite-sized little girl could be so strong, able to carry a grown man's weight in one hand. Moreover, her entire person was in such a precariously dangerous position, hanging over the edge of the cliff only by their tips of her feet to support two people's weight. Lu Junyao creased his brows together and said in a low voice, "Have you lost your mind? Do you know how dangerous it is?" "No kidding. If you know the danger, then hurry up and give me your hand." Qing Yu roared right back at him as she stretched her hand out once more. Lu Junyao would only have to reach his hand out, and he'll be able to grip her hand. Lu Junyao's gaze darkened, suddenly seeing a white figure slowly coming closer, and the man's gentle melodious voice was then heard. "Qing, you're finally here." Qing Yu's body stiffened, and her voice turned chill. "Stay away from me. How can I possibly stand back and do nothing while seeing you place yourself in such danger?" Qing Tianlin said with a helpless sigh. "Listen to me and release your hand, so that I can pull you up. That man will just drain your strength and be a burden to you." Qing Yu's face was grave and severe as she spat out her words one at a time. "I've said that I will not allow you to harm the people by my side. Qing Tianlin, I will never forgive you. Never will you and I ever be able to coexist in peace. In this life, one of us has to die." Her words seemed to strike the man where it hurt most as the smile on that handsome countenance slowly faded, to gradually become tainted with a tinge of malevolence. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Since that is the case, I must definitely have this man here killed today. Once his voice fell, Qing Tianlin stretched his hand out to grab Qing Yu's ankle that was hanging just over the ledge, seeking to pull her up. With his other hand, he hurled a black gaseous mass downwards to strike at Lu Junyao. Within that black misty mass, an indiscernible creature could faintly be seen, its body thrashing menacingly inside. Qing Yu's eyes dimmed and twisted her feet in a cross to break free of Qing Tianlin's restraining grasp. Grabbing onto Lu Junyao's hand, she actually went plummeting down into the seemingly bottomless black abyss below. "Oh, Qing. Chapter 213. 2. Kissing is something one becomes familiar with after the first time. Qing Tianlin's eyes flared wide with horror, frantically reaching his hand out to try to catch her, but merely just managed to pull off a pale purple bit of cloth from her clothes. Losing her anchoring point of support, the slender figure was like a kite with a broken string, plummeting speedily down and disappearing from sight in a blink. She would rather choose to die than to stay by his side. She had destroyed her life's cultivated powers, and sought only for death to claim her in her previous life. But he was not beside her back then, and it was understandable that there was nothing he could have done. But this time, he had actually watched her fall down into the deep dark abyss with his very own eyes. So how could he possibly allow her to leave him one more time? Even if he had to break both her wings to imprison her by his side, he would not ever allow her to depart from his world in such a resolute and heartless manner again. In a moment, dark clouds gathered over the palace as lightning and thunder crackled and boomed, like an immense storm was imminent, causing the air around to become heavily oppressive, a terrifying sight. Behind the white-robed figure, a countless multitude of shadowy figures suddenly appeared, crouched respectfully before the man as their voices rose in unison. Ready to do the master's bidding. The man's gracefully handsome countenance was partially shrouded under the darkness of night, and the expression on his face could not be seen. But the evil malevolence emanating from his body palpably felt, and his voice sounded in a deep and low tone. No matter the price, she must be found. Yes, master. At the bottom of the gorge, the place was filled with relentless, icy and bone-chilling winds. Qingyu was grabbing on to the hilt of a dagger lodged into the face of the cliff. Her other arm curled tightly around the man's waist. The two of them pressed close against each other, as they hung off the sheer cliff face. Caught in such a dangerous situation, she really could not afford to be bothered by the intimate position they were in. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Knowing Qing Tianlin's suspicious nature, he would definitely send people to come down to search for her, so she would have to hold out till dawn at the very least. Though this body she had in this life was weak and frail, fortunately she had undergone highly difficult and stringent training with it over so many years. So no matter if it was in terms of physical fitness or resilience, she was now stronger than more people. Foolish lass, were you thinking to die with me in the name of love? The man's mirth-filled voice sounded beside her ear. Qingyu was stunned into a daze for a moment before she shot him a sharp glance. She then scoffed, imitating a spitting sound. Tui, you wish. Who wants to die with you for love? I have yet to live enough. Lu Junyao curved his lips up at the corners, his violet eyes shining with a tenderly alluring glint as he said, Why didn't you just throw me off? A scourge lasts 1,000 years, so I will not die so easily. Chapter 213. 3. Kissing is something one becomes familiar with after the first time. Qingyu's eyes narrowed, and without knowing why, she then said this. Because I know that you will not leave me behind as well. Once those words came out, the two of them froze in place for a moment before Qingyu was able to react after realizing what she just said. Her face looked a little awkward, and she then turned her head away to the side, feeling a little self-conscious. After a long while, the man right beside her suddenly laughed softly. He seldom laughed out aloud from the heart like this, but ever since he met Qingyu, he often found himself laughing. With his already devilish good looks enough to bring ruin to nations and countries, seeing him laugh like that would make one willing to just die for him. Only seeking to see him laugh heartily like that again. Lu Junyao suddenly said in a gentle voice, Hold on tight. What? Qingyu was puzzled. Was she holding him too tightly? The very next second, her head that was looking to the side was suddenly turned back around by the man's hand. Before she was able to ask him what he was doing, the alluring and soul-captivating countenance suddenly loomed close before her eyes, and her lips felt something soft pressing against them, so tyrannical and fierce that she suddenly forgot to even react. That soft thing viciously assaulted those beautiful and luscious lips, but was then seemingly still not satisfied with the situation, as it went on to sweep deeper inside. Qingyu was shocked into a daze, almost releasing the grip of her hand as she was held tightly in the grasp of the man. It was in that dangerous and precarious situation, along the surface of the sheer cliff, that she froze in place, unable to move as she was bullied. The cold icy wind lower down the cliff face had not been able to clear and calm a certain man's mind, but instead stoked the flames of desire. Qingyu did not even dare to struggle, as only the heavens knew just how high they were from the bottom, and their bodies would probably smash into pieces if they fell. Hence, this was the first time that she was so passively aggrieved, and was taken advantage of like that. After that, the mesmerizingly alluring young lady's face was tinted with a peachy tinge after the bout of bullying, looking rather pitiful looking as her eyes misted over, and she said indignantly, Weren't you unable to move your body? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Someone was in rather great spirits having fulfilled his desires. His mood greatly improved as he blinked his violet eyes innocently. I was suddenly overtaken with such a strong impulse earlier, and my heart needed to do something to vent out that intense emotion. I suddenly found myself able to move. Who permitted you to do such a shameless thing to me in the first place? Qingyu stared at him angrily, a tiny flicker of flame burning in her eyes. Lu Junyao laughed easily as he looked into the young lady's pretty little face without blinking, the expression on his face tender. I heard you say earlier that you will not leave me behind? Qingyu's became slightly surprised, and before she could even say anything, she heard him open his mouth to speak again. Remember your own words. You must never ever leave me behind, just like I will never ever leave you behind as well. Chapter 214. 4. Seeing you wounded pains my heart. Seeing that the man behind her did not say a single word for a long while. She guessed that it was because her wound had torn open, and was too horrendous to even look at. She then bit her lip and said, I'm fine. My wounds heal very quickly, and it will heal over in just a couple more days. Those words were not a lie, as the flame element in her body really possessed such an amazing effect, giving her healing powers that was 10 times stronger than normal people. A slash wound that would take others more than a month to gradually start to heal would only take her 10 days, at most, to recover from. Lu Junyao's eyes darkened, and his finger ran gingerly over the uneven scab that had formed on her skin. Qingyu's body stiffened, and she was just about to ask whether he was done applying the medicine when a pair of long arms slid around her waist. The man's low magnetic voice was tinged with a slight hoarseness as it rose softly. Do not put yourself at such risk anymore next time. Seeing you covered these wounds really hurts my heart. Hearing that, Qingyu's entire body flushed a faint red, and her hands that hung down at her sides unconsciously clenched up tightly. Her clothes were half undone, and her back was fully exposed, so she was already quite tensed up. Now that he was leaning in so close, she immediately became even more discomfited. I'm really alright. Have you finished applying the medicine? Lu Junyao answered softly, and then gathered the young lady's clothes back up before he turned himself around. Cover yourself up properly, so you do not catch a cold. Qingyu was a little surprised. He had actually not done anything to tease her, which was rather strange. She quickly dressed herself, and then raised her head to look up. Where is this place that we're in now? Lu Junyao scanned his eyes around the surroundings. People outside have always said that the bottom of the fleeting cloud fortress is filled with all kinds of danger, and people who fall off from there have no chance of survival. But it seems we've run into some luck. Qingyu raised an eyebrow. Could the rumors be wrong? The rumors are not wrong, and since the fleeting cloud fortress has 2 different entrances, the bottom would similarly have a life's gate and death's gate. Lu Junyao said in explanation. There was nothing strange in the waters that we fell into, and neither did we encounter any kind of danger throughout our descent. That clearly shows that we fell into the life's gate. So I see. Qingyu nodded in understanding. Then how are we going to walk out from here? The tone of her voice clearly showed that she fully trusted and depended on the man before her. But she had not realized that at that very moment. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Lu Junyao's eyes flashed with a faint and indiscernible smile inside. I do not fully know how we are going to walk out from this place, as I have never come down here before. But we will not go wrong following the direction our hearts tell us to go. Qingyu blinked her eyes a couple of times, and then suddenly pointed at a spot. I feel that it's this side. Coincidentally, Lu Junyao also pointed into the same direction and said, We go this way. They had made the same choice, showing great rapport. The 2 of them looked at each other for a moment, and both of them burst out laughing at the same time. Chapter 215. One Love comes rushing in, too fast to nip in the bud, the barbarian tribe. Qing Wanfei remained in the forbidden chambers for a good half-month, watching the man lying ill upon the bed every day. But besides his breathing normally, the man did not show any signs of regaining consciousness. Sometimes while she watched the man lying there motionless, she would feel an unspeakable kind of bitterness, but she would not give up on waiting for him. She had after all pulled through these few hundred years already, and she was still alive, able to see the person she loves, which was most fortunate. Big Sis Fei. The heavy stone doors of the forbidden chambers opened slightly, and a tiny head poked inside, two adorable plates hanging down the sides. Her large vivid eyes were highly lively, and her pretty and delicate little face was lovable and cute. Qing Lan Fei raised her eyes up when she heard that voice, and she said in surprise, "Ayu, why have you come?" The young little girl mischievously held a finger over her lips and shushed softly. She then gazed around her for a while before she squeezed her petite little body through the small opening in the door. Qing Lan Fei watched on with puzzlement at the girl's furtive movements. "You are?" Ayu trotted over to her in a few steps, and as she came close, she said mysteriously, "I put the guard outside to sleep, so Big Sis must hurry up and leave with me now. I waited so long till the chieftain went out today. He is not here in the tribe now, and even if he discovers it when he comes back, you would have left for heavens know how long already." Qing Lan Fei was taken aback. "To go where?" "To leave the barbarian tribe. Your presence here has been discovered by the chieftain, and although I do not know why the chieftain did not decide to execute you, but the barbarian tribe detests all outsiders, so you will not be spared," Ayu said with a worried face. "It took me so much effort to save you, and I really do not wish for you to be killed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You foolish girl." Qing Lan Fei shook her head helplessly. "I know that you mean well, but I will not leave. Moreover, your chieftain will not make any moves against me, so you can set your mind at ease." "Why is that?" Ayu's eyes widened in amazement, not understanding why. The chieftain emphasizes on the tribe's rules very strongly, so how could he possibly allow an outsider like you to continue to remain among us? "To tell you the truth, I am actually an old acquaintance of your chieftain, and so he will not do me any harm." Qing Lan Fei explained in a gentle voice. "You had better leave quickly before the guard outside wakes up. Do not let anyone see you, or you will be scolded by your grandfather again." Ayu knitted up her brows in incomprehension and continued to ask, "But why are you unwilling to leave?" Qing Lan Fei curved up the corners of her lips, the expression on her face gentle. Her gaze turned sharp as she turned to look at the man on the bed, and she said in a soft voice, "Because of him." Chapter 215. Too love comes rushing in, too fast to nip in the bud him? Ayu was at times a little muddle-headed, and she had thought that she should help the beautiful Big Sis that she liked very much escape, never noticing that there was actually another person in the forbidden chamber. Upon seeing that now, her bright eyes immediately went wide with incredulity. Who is he? To think that there would actually be such a good-looking person in the barbarian tribe. How come she had not seen this person before? Little did she know that the person before her eyes was already a good 700 years old, and she was a little girl who was not even close to 100, so how could she possibly have seen him before? It was thought that she would not even have heard of him at all. Qing Lan Fei's eyes softened a little. "He is my husband." That single soft and gentle statement had however caused Ayu to become stunned into a daze, and it was a good while before she was able to react. "Big Sis Fei, you're already married?" Qing Lan Fei acknowledged softly. Ayu seemed to be in disbelief as she muttered softly, "I really couldn't tell." Qing Lan Fei laughed softly. "People from Cloud Heaven have a longer lifespan, and when they attain a certain level, they will no longer age. So it is normal that you did not realize it." Ayu went on to nod like she understood, and then suddenly turned to look puzzledly at the man lying on the bed. "But this man here is clearly from the barbarian tribe. How could he possibly be Big Sis Fei's husband? Did Big Sis Fei come here among the barbarian tribe's people before?" People from the barbarian tribe were able to sense the aura of people from their tribe, and hence Ayu was certain that this man was from the barbarian tribe, and that he had an extraordinary identity. Qing Lan Fei's eyes were gentle as her slender fingers lightly caressed the man's cheek. Her voice was filled with indescribable tenderness as she said, "This man here was a wild one in the past, who loved to wander and roam throughout the lands. Taking advantage of his handsome looks and his smooth and glib tongue, he went around womanizing, seducing innocent and naive women. An absolutely detestable man. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Iyuha! The little girl's jaw fell in surprise, her mouth hanging wide open. Then why did Big Sis Fei choose to be with such a bad man? You're right. Why? Qinglan Fei gave a helpless sigh, and then said in a slightly joking manner. Maybe it was because he was really bad. In order to not let him hurt any more innocent young maidens, I chose to sacrifice myself. Qinglan Fei did not say anything more after that, because if she did, she would not be able to stop herself from recalling all the bits and pieces of the times they shared in the past, and feel hurt by all the memories. The woman who was so beautiful looking she seemed surreal, was at that moment looking more mortal, with a tinge of sadness lingering between her brows. Ayu followed her gaze to look at the man lying on the bed and then asked softly, "When will he wake up then?" Chapter 215. 3 Love comes rushing in, too fast to nip in the bud. He will wake up. He is just too tired. Qinglan Fei muttered softly, and it was not known whether she was saying that to Ayu, or she was just comforting herself. It had been clear back when Yin Shu wanted to have her captured. Though he had been unconscious, his body had reflexively moved to protect her. So why? Has he not woken up yet? Qinglan Fei slowly lowered her body as her slender arms curled over the man's shoulders, as she gently laid upon his chest. She could feel the steady breathing, and her voice was weak, tinged with pain as she whispered, "I miss you, Jingyu. Will you wake up soon?" She was now all alone in this cold, desolate world, and there was nothing else here she missed. Jingyu is her only one she could not bear to part with. Of course, she would not forget the hatred and vengeance she was carrying on her back. She will not spare the culprit who had caused her and Jingyu to be separated for more than 100 years. Qinglan Fei's gentle eyes slowly clouded up with darkness, and her lips then parted to say softly, "Ayu, when your chieftain comes back, help me pass him a message. Tell him that I have something I need to discuss with him." 3 days had passed after the 3 great sects' friendship meet, and it seemed like nothing too sensational had happened this year. It seemed as if everyone who came out from the Carefree Valley had all lost their memory, unable to recall what really happened in there, having cleanly forgotten what the place was like at all, which was highly mystifying. This was one of the reasons why the Carefree Valley was so mysterious. People who came out from there always seemed to have been brainwashed, and there was no need to worry that their secrets would be revealed. Upon the mountain right opposite the Faint Mist sect was where the gathered cloud lofts sat. Although its location was highly remote, it had quite a number of customers every day, where not only was it not cold and cheerless, it was always bustling with activity. Fragrance Court. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The weather in early spring still had a hint of a chill in the air, but people were dressed thinly inside, the ladies showing off their curvaceous figures. Some were teasing the patrons with whispered words, and some were bringing out wine as they weaved through the main hall. But there was one thing in common with all the ladies. They were all extremely beautiful looking, prizes like nothing mere commoners could possibly birth. Lu Ji had noticed a particular person for a long time. Her trademark was a light green dress she always wore, with a very unique design. It was a short and tiny blouse with a flounce trim on top that revealed a section of her fair slender waist, highly eye-catching. Just a glimpse at that tiny waist was enough to make people drool, and she was also blessed with an exquisitely soul-captivating face, a great budding beauty. Her eyes were bright with a swirling light in them that made men willing to give up everything for her, only to win a glance from the beauty. Chapter 215. 4 Love comes rushing in, too fast to nip in the bud. But though this particular beauty was stunning and ravishing, no one dared to really come forward to hit on her. The patrons who frequented the fragrance court knew that this little vixen with her alluring looks was actually one truly vicious character. She was not the same as the other ladies who entertained the patrons, but was in charge of the fragrance court's security. If any conflict between patrons came up, or someone came to seek trouble, Lu Ji was the one who would step up to resolve it. She might look slender and frail, but she possessed great fighting prowess, being one of the top 3 among the 12 courtesans under Bai Ji Yan in terms of cultivation levels. Lu Ji had an inclination that no one knew about. She actually liked women, like those women who would suddenly swoon and become unable to walk when they set eyes upon a handsome-looking man. Had always been people she despised the most. The kind she admired were not just empty decorative vases, but ones who were able to attract her very soul. But till now, she still had not met this person. Throughout her long slow life, she not been unable to find such a person, which was one of her biggest regret. But today, an exception seemed to have appeared. The fragrance court had no lack of female customers frequenting the place, but they were all older women who were already 30 to 40 years of age, and it was the first time she saw such a young lady in there. It had been a while since she came in, and she did not ask for company from anyone, but just ordered a pot of tea. She sat quietly in a corner as she watched the dancer in revealing clothes gyrate her hips on the platform, not too far away from her table. It was clearly such a vulgar performance that was unbearable to see, but she was watching on with such relish, her eyes intent, drawing attention to herself. The young lady had a head of luxurious smooth black hair, carelessly bound up in a loose coil, looking a little messy, but was somehow indescribably and languidly mesmerizing. With her black hair casually draped behind her pristine white clothes, she exuded a certain clean and untainted perfectness. It was probably because Lu Ji's gaze had been too intense. It caused the young lady to turn her head to look at her. It was just one quick and fleeting glance, but it made Lu Ji's heart suddenly skip a beat. That was probably what desire felt like. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She was outstandingly beautiful herself already, and she had never ever felt anything despite having met many beautiful-looking people. It was after all just a flesh shell, and all of them were always already tainted in one way or another by the rigorous and unforgiving world. But this young lady made her feel a very strong urge to go get to know her. That's right, to hit on someone. To think that this woman who was so incredibly cold and haughty, whom kept strangers at arm's length, would one day actually go approach and hit on someone. And such a young lady at that. But before she could even take any action, that beautiful and alluring face was suddenly tainted with a tinge of anger. It was for no other reason than that a damned man had slipped in before her to go talk to the young lady, who stirred her heart. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.